The crimson sun hung low over Rattlesnake Gulch, casting long shadows across the parched earth as 5 riders crested the ridge, their silhouettes black against the dying light. They reined in their horses, dust swirling around them as they surveyed the modest ranch below, where lamplight glowed warm through cabin windows. "That's the place," the lead rider growled, his voice like boot leather dragged through gravel. Widow Sullivan spread. Little did these bandits know that the quiet woman who worked that hardscrabble ranch had once been known as Quick Draw Catherine throughout the Western Territories, a legend who could draw, aim, and fire with supernatural speed. A woman who had famously gunned down 10 of the notorious Blackwell gang in 10 seconds flat during the Great Prescott Bank robbery of '72, the leader of the riders. A man known only as Vance lifted a brass spyglass to his eye, studying the small homestead with calculating precision. His weathered face betrayed nothing, but a hint of cruel anticipation glinted in his cold grey eyes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ranch wasn't much. A modest cabin with a new coat of whitewash, a well-maintained barn, a corral with a few quality horses, and several fenced pastures where cattle grazed lazily in the evening light. Nothing to suggest that it held any particular value beyond honest living. "You sure this is wise, boss?" asked the youngest of the riders, a jittery man with a patchy beard who kept shifting in his saddle. "It's just a widow woman and her girl. Can't be much worth taking." Vance didn't take his eye from the spyglass as he responded, "That land sits atop the only water source for 10 miles in any direction. The railroad survey confirmed it last month. Whoever controls that spring controls the whole valley once the drought hits." He collapsed the spyglass with a decisive snap. "And Mason wants the whole valley." The mention of Mason, the ruthless land baron who controlled most of the territory west of Shadow Creek, silenced any further objections. When Mason wanted something, people either accommodated or disappeared. The 5 riders had been hired, specifically for their lack of conscience and their talent for persuasion of the most violent kind. "Remember," Vance instructed as he tucked the spyglass into his saddlebag, "Mason wants this clean. We offer to buy, she refuses. We escalate until she changes her mind." A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "And if persuasion requires using the daughter, well, that's just business." As the bandits plotted on the ridge inside the cabin below, Catherine Sullivan stood at her kitchen table, strong hands working methodically to knead bread dough. At 41, her once coal-black hair now held streaks of silver at the temples, pulled back in a practical braid that hung between her shoulder blades. The sleeves of her simple cotton dress were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle. Strength earned not from fancy shooting exhibitions, but from 6 years of working the land alone after her husband's death. Through the open kitchen window, she watched her daughter Anna collect eggs from the henhouse. At 16, Anna had her mother's sharp green eyes and quiet determination, but none of the darkness that had once shadowed Catherine's soul. The girl moved with the lightness of youth, humming softly to herself as she carefully placed each egg in her basket. "Ma!" Anna called across the yard, holding up an unusually large brown egg. "Old Bessie's outdone herself today. This one's big as a fist." Catherine smiled, the expression softening the weathered lines of her face. "That old hen's full of surprises," she called back, "just like her namesake." For 6 years they'd lived on this patch of sun-baked earth in the Arizona territory, far from the whispers that had once followed Catherine across the frontier. Here she was just Widow Sullivan, who raised the finest quarter horses this side of the Mississippi, who taught the school children on Sundays, who kept to herself, but was always ready with a helping hand when neighbors fell ill or encountered hard times. No one in Rattlesnake Gulch knew that those hands had once been famous from Dodge City to Tombstone. No one knew that quick-draw Catherine Sullivan had outdrawn every man foolish enough to challenge her during her 3 years riding as a Wells Fargo guard. No one knew that she had earned her nickname by demonstrating a seemingly impossible defeat, dropping 10 armed outlaws in 10 seconds with 10 perfect shots, each one finding its mark in the center of a man's chest. Catherine wiped flour from her hands and moved to the carved oak chest in the corner of the room. She opened it only when Anna was outside, when the memories grew too insistent to ignore. Inside lay folded newspaper clippings, yellowed with age. Quick-draw Catherine thwarts, stagecoach robbery. Female gunslinger outdraws the masculine competition. Again, 10 men, 10 seconds, 10 bullets, Sullivan's impossible feat witnessed by dozens. Beneath the clippings lay a pair of custom Colt peacemakers, their ivory grips inlaid with turquoise, their barrels engraved with delicate scrollwork that belied their deadly purpose. The guns were masterpieces crafted by the legendary gunsmith Samuel Chen, balanced perfectly for Catherine's hands, with triggers so sensitive they seemed to respond to her thoughts rather than her touch. 6 years since she'd worn them. 6 years since her husband Thomas had been killed by a stray bullet during a bank robbery in Prescott, leaving her alone with a 10-year-old daughter and a choice to make. Continue the life that had made her infamous, or create a new one where Anna could grow up without the burden of her mother's legend. Catherine had chosen peace, trading her famous Colts for a plow, her leather gun belt for an apron, her shooter's stance for a mother's embrace. She'd kept the peacemakers, unable to part with Chen's masterwork, but had locked away the woman who had wielded them with such deadly precision. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her memories. Catherine quickly returned the guns to their hiding place and moved to the window. Riders approaching, 5 of them, moving with purpose rather than the casual pace of neighbors paying a social call. Her eyes narrowed, old instincts surfacing. Her hand reached automatically for a weapon that was no longer at her hip, a movement so deeply ingrained it had become reflex. "Anna," she called out, her voice calm but carrying an edge her daughter immediately recognized. "Come inside now, please." The girl looked up, registered the change in her mother's tone, and immediately headed for the house, abandoning her egg basket by the henhouse. Even at 16, Anna had never questioned that particular tone. It was rare enough that she recognized its importance. As Anna hurried inside, Catherine noted how the 5 riders slowed, watching her daughter with too much interest. Catherine's spine stiffened, her mind cataloguing details with precision most would find unnerving. The way the lead rider sat his horse with arrogant ease, the nervous energy of the youngest, the calculating gaze of the tall one that marked him as the true danger. "Who are they, Ma?" Anna asked, closing the door behind her. "I don't know, honey," Catherine replied, her eyes never leaving the approaching men. "But I want you to go to the root cellar. Take the back door and stay down." "There until I call the all clear," Anna hesitated. "But Ma—" "Now, Anna." The tone brooked no argument. As Anna reluctantly headed for the cellar, Catherine moved to the fireplace and reached for Thomas's old Winchester repeating rifle. It wasn't her matched Colts with their hair triggers and perfect balance, but it would serve. The riders stopped in front of the house, dust settling around their horses. The leader, a hard-faced man with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, touched his fingers to the brim of his hat in mocking courtesy. "Mrs. Sullivan." His voice carried a false pleasantness that did nothing to mask the menace beneath. Catherine stepped onto the porch, the Winchester held casually at her side, not threatening, but present. Her stance was that of a simple rancher, but those who had known her in her previous life would have recognized the subtle shift in her posture, the centered balance that had once made her famous for her lightning-fast draws. "Gentlemen," Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. She acknowledged, her voice carrying the pleasant tone of any frontier woman greeting strangers, revealing nothing of the calculations running through her mind. Distances, angles, the position of the sun, the direction of the wind. "Can I help you?" "Hope so, ma'am," the leader replied. "Name's Vance. These are my associates. We represent Mr. Elijah Mason of Shadow Creek." He paused, clearly expecting the name to register. Catherine's expression remained pleasant, unreadable. "What can I do for Mr. Mason?" Vance leaned forward slightly in his saddle. "Mr. Mason is interested in acquiring your property, Mrs. Sullivan. He's prepared to make a generous offer, twice its market value. I'm afraid my land isn't for sale, Mr. Vance," Catherine said evenly. "Not now, not ever. Rattlesnake Gulch has plenty of land available if Mr. Mason is looking to expand his holdings." Something shifted in Vance's eyes, a coldness, a calculation. "Well, now, that's a shame. We had our hearts set on this particular piece. Has good water, good positioning, strategic, you might say." The way he emphasized strategic told Catherine everything she needed to know. These weren't representatives of a legitimate business interest. The coming railroad was pushing through these territories, and water rights had become increasingly valuable. Her property, with its natural spring, that remained flowing even in the driest seasons, would be perfect for controlling the entire valley. "As I said, not for sale," Catherine repeated firmly. "Now I've got bread in the oven and chores waiting. Good day, gentlemen." She turned as if to go back inside, watching their reflections in the window glass. "That's a mighty pretty daughter." "You've got Mrs. Sullivan," Vance called after her, his tone making the compliment an unmistakable threat. "Be a shame if anything happened to her, times being what they are, dangerous for a young girl." Catherine froze, her hand on the doorframe. For 6 years she had kept her past buried, kept Quickdraw Catherine locked away, but some threats couldn't be answered as Widow Sullivan. She turned slowly, meeting Vance's gaze directly for the first time. Something in her eyes, some glimpse of the woman she'd once been, must have shone through, because the smirk on his face faltered slightly. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice still pleasant, but carrying a new undertone that made the horses shift nervously, "my answer remains no. I suggest you and your associates move along. Rattlesnake Gulch is a peaceful community. We like to keep it that way." The message wasn't lost on Vance, whose eyes narrowed as he studied her more carefully, perhaps sensing something beneath the widow's calm exterior. After a moment, he nodded tightly and turned his horse. "We'll be seeing you again. Mrs. Sullivan," he called over his shoulder, "people around here might be interested to know who their neighbor really is." The last comment confirmed her suspicions. Vance knew something of her past, or thought he did. Catherine watched until the riders were out of sight before calling. Anna from the cellar, her mind already racing ahead. Tonight, she would need to open the false bottom of her bedroom trunk, the one Anna had never seen. Inside lay the last remnants of Quickdraw Catherine, a hand-tooled gun belt with custom holsters, a pair of soft leather gloves worn smooth by years of practice draws, and most importantly, her shooting journal with records of every duel, every exhibition, every skill she'd perfected after 6 years of peace. It seemed the legend might need to rise again. Rattlesnake Gulch was the kind of town that appeared on maps as an afterthought, a small dot nestled in the Arizona Badlands where life moved with the predictable rhythm of seasons. Main Street boasted only essential establishments: Garrett's General Store, the Dusty Boot Saloon, a small whitewashed church, and Sheriff Wade Callahan's office. Beyond these lay scattered homes and ranches, with the rust-colored mesas watching over it all like ancient sentinels preparing for war. Catherine Sullivan's ranch sat 3 miles east of town, balanced perfectly between privacy and convenience. The modest cabin Thomas had built with his own hands stood surrounded by carefully maintained pastures, a small apple orchard just coming into bloom, and a bubbling spring that never ran dry, even in the harshest drought years. The afternoon following, the unwelcome visitors found Catherine in town completing her regular Saturday deliveries. Her quarter-horse foals were Rattlesnake Gulch's prized commodities, sought after by ranchers throughout the territory for their intelligence and stamina. "That new bay colt of yours might be your finest yet, Catherine," Martha Garrett said, accepting the supplies list for Catherine's weekly order at the general store. Martha and her husband had owned the store since Rattlesnake Gulch was nothing more than a handful of hopeful settlers and a water hole. "How's Anna feeling? Missed her at the social last Sunday." "Just a spring fever," Catherine replied carefully, selecting coffee beans from Martha's stock. "She's helping the Hendersons with their new foal today." Sheriff Callahan entered, the bell above the door announcing his arrival. At 50-something, Wade Callahan was as much a fixture in Rattlesnake Gulch as the Mazers themselves, steady, reliable and not easily moved. His badge shone against his worn vest as he nodded respectfully. "Mrs. Sullivan, Mrs. Garrett," he greeted them. "Fine day." Catherine nodded in return, noting the unusual tension in the sheriff's posture. The visit from the 5 riders clearly wasn't sitting well with him either. "Heard you had some visitors yesterday, Catherine," Sheriff Callahan said, confirming her suspicions. "In small towns, news traveled fast as telegrams." "Word travels quickly," Catherine commented, measuring coffee into a paper bag with precise movements. "The Henderson boy saw them leaving your property," the sheriff explained. "Said they didn't look like friendly callers." Catherine considered her response carefully. Wade Callahan was a good man, a fair lawman, but even good men sometimes viewed women as delicate creatures needing protection. The last thing she needed was well-intentioned interference. "Just some men interested in buying land," she said casually. "I declined their offer." Martha leaned forward over the counter. "Were they the same ones who've been asking questions at the saloon? Frank mentioned some rough types drinking there 3 nights running, asking about property boundaries and such." Sheriff Callahan nodded. "That'd be them, led by a fellow named Vance." He watched Catherine's face as he spoke the name, looking for recognition. "Never met him before yesterday," Catherine replied truthfully. And she hadn't, though the name stirred something in her memory, some connection she couldn't quite place. "Well, I've got telegrams from Tucson and Prescott," the sheriff continued. "Seems Mr. Vance and his associates have a habit of acquiring land through methods that don't always align with the law." "Mason's men," Martha added, with a note of worry in her voice. "Everyone knows Elijah Mason doesn't take no for an answer when he wants something." "Railroads coming through these parts next year," Sheriff Callahan said, "and certain properties suddenly become mighty valuable." "Like land with natural springs," Catherine observed. The sheriff's eyes sharpened. "Exactly like that. Your property sits right at the water source that feeds the entire Eastern Valley." Martha made a small sound of concern. "Catherine, you don't think they're welcome to try," Catherine cut in, her voice calm but firm. "My land isn't for sale, not at any price." The conversation shifted to other matters: spring planting, the church social, Judge Peterson's upcoming circuit visit. But Catherine felt Sheriff Callahan's gaze following her as she completed her purchases. He was a good lawman, observant enough to sense something beneath her composed exterior. "I'll walk you to your wagon, Mrs. Sullivan," he offered as she prepared to leave. Outside, with Main Street's modest bustle providing privacy, the sheriff spoke directly. "Those men, Vance especially, they're not the type to take no for an answer. Been reports of fires, accidents, all manner of misfortune befalling folks who stood in Mason's way." Catherine secured her purchases in the wagon. "Are you suggesting I sell my home to criminals, Sheriff?" "No, ma'am," Callahan replied quickly, "just suggesting caution. Maybe send Anna to stay with relatives for a spell until this blows over. Anna has no relatives but me, Catherine said, her voice softening slightly at the genuine concern in the sheriff's weathered face. But I appreciate your concern. She climbed onto the wagon seat with practiced ease, gathering the reins. Sheriff Callahan placed a hand on the wagon's edge, holding her gaze. There's something else, he said, lowering his voice. Vance was asking particular questions about you, not just your land. Catherine's hands stilled on the reins. What kind of questions? Where you came from before Rattlesnake Gulch. Whether you had any unusual skills. The sheriff's eyes held a question he wasn't quite asking. Said he'd heard stories about a widow from these parts. A chill that had nothing to do with the spring breeze settled over Catherine. People love their stories, Sheriff, she said evenly, especially about widows living alone. Sheriff Callahan nodded slowly, not entirely convinced. Just be careful, Catherine. I'll keep an eye on Vance and his men when they're in town, but my jurisdiction only stretches so far. I've been taking care of myself and Anna for a long time, she replied. We'll be fine. As Catherine drove the wagon down Main Street toward home, her mind worked through the new information. Vance knew something, or suspected something, about her past. The question was how much, and more importantly, how far was he willing to go to get what he wanted? The road home wound through towering saguaro cacti and flowering ocotillo, their crimson blooms stark against the dusty landscape. Catherine allowed the familiar terrain to calm her thoughts, organizing what she knew and what she needed to do. Vance wanted her land for its water rights, likely for Elijah Mason's railroad schemes. Her refusal had already triggered threats, veiled but unmistakable, and now it seemed he might be using her past as additional leverage. As the wagon crested, the final rise before her property, Catherine saw Anna in the distance, riding back from the Hendersons' ranch. Her daughter's easy grace in the saddle brought a momentary smile to Catherine's face. Thomas had taught Anna to ride before she could properly walk, and the girl had inherited her father's natural way with horses. Catherine's smile faded as she considered what might lie ahead. For 6 years, she'd sheltered Anna from the whispers and stares that had followed quick-draw Catherine across the territories. She'd created this peaceful existence precisely to give her daughter the normal life that had been denied to her. Now, that carefully constructed peace was threatened not just by men wanting her land, but by the possible exposure of her past. As the wagon rolled into the yard, Anna dismounted from her pinto mare, her cheeks flushed with exertion and excitement. Irma! The Henderson filly finally arrived, coal-black with a perfect white star. Mrs. Henderson says I can help train her if you agree. Catherine forced a reassuring smile. That's wonderful, honey. The Hendersons know quality horseflesh when they see it, and they recognize it in you too. Anna's smile faltered as she noticed her mother's expression. What's wrong? Did something happen in town? Nothing to worry about, Catherine replied, though her tight expression betrayed her. Help me unload these supplies, then we need to talk. Inside the cabin, Catherine moved with unusual purpose, checking the door locks, glancing repeatedly out the windows. Anna watched her mother with growing concern, recognizing behavior she hadn't seen since they'd first arrived in Rattlesnake Gulch, when Catherine had jumped at shadows and kept Anna close at all times. It's those men from yesterday, isn't it? Anna asked finally, her voice steady, despite her obvious concern. Sheriff Callahan told you something about them. Catherine paused in her preparations, studying her daughter's face. At 16, Anna was no longer a child to be shielded from every harsh reality, but how much could she understand about a past she'd never known? Yes, Catherine admitted, deciding partial truth was better than comforting lies. Those men work for Elijah Mason, a land baron from Shadow Creek. He wants our spring, and men like Mason aren't accustomed to being refused. Anna's green eyes, so like her father's, widened slightly. What will we do? For now, we prepare, Catherine answered, walking to her bedroom. Come with me, there's something I need to show you. In her bedroom, Catherine knelt before the large trunk at the foot of her bed. Anna had seen it 1,000 times, had even helped clean it during spring housekeeping, but had never questioned why it remained locked at all times. Catherine produced a small key from the chain around her neck and opened the trunk. As expected, Anna saw folded blankets and winter clothing on top. But then Catherine reached beneath these familiar items and pressed a hidden latch. The false bottom of the trunk popped up, revealing a hidden compartment. "Ma." Anna's voice held confusion and the first stirrings of fear. Catherine lifted out a hand-tooled leather gun belt, the twin holsters empty, but clearly shaped for specific weapons. Next came a pair of soft leather shooting gloves, their fingertips worn thin from years of use. Finally, she removed a leather-bound journal and several yellowed newspaper clippings. "There are things about me, about our family, that you don't know, Anna," Catherine said quietly, sitting on the edge of the bed and gesturing for her daughter to join her. "Things I've kept from you, hoping you'd never need to know." Anna sat beside her mother, eyes fixed on the unfamiliar items. "What things?" Rather than answering directly, Catherine handed her one of the newspaper clippings. Anna's eyes grew wider as she read the headline, "Quick Draw, Catherine Outguns Infamous Red Canyon Gang." "I don't understand," Anna whispered, though the dawning realization was evident in her face. "This is you?" Catherine nodded, taking back the clipping and smoothing it carefully. "Before I met your father, before you were born, I made my living with these." She held up the empty gun belt. "I was a Wells Fargo guard for 3 years, then an exhibition shooter. I was known for my speed, could draw and fire faster than anyone in the Arizona Territory." "But you're a rancher," Anna protested weakly. "You raise horses. You bake bread on Saturdays and teach Sunday school." "I am those things now," Catherine agreed. "But before your father died, I was something else entirely. The woman those newspaper stories talk about, Quick Draw Catherine, that was me." Anna shook her head, trying to reconcile the gentle mother she knew with the gunslinger in the yellowed clippings. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "To protect you," Catherine answered simply. "After your father was killed in that bank robbery, I wanted a different life for us. Somewhere you could grow up without being whispered about, pointed at." The daughter of Quick Draw Catherine would never have been just Anna Sullivan. She would always have been defined by her mother's reputation. Anna reached for another clipping, this one featuring a sketch of a younger Catherine standing beside a stagecoach, twin pistols at her hips, her stance confident and challenging. "Is this why we left Prescott? Why we changed our name from Sloan to Sullivan?" Catherine nodded. "Sullivan was my maiden name. It gave us a fresh start. And these men, Vance and the others, they know about who you were?" "I think Vance suspects," Catherine admitted. "He made a comment as they were leaving that suggested as much. If he's researched me, he might be planning to use my past against me, thinking that exposing me would drive us out of Rattlesnake Gulch." A hint of her old fire flashed in Catherine's eyes. "But I won't be driven out, Anna. Not again. This is our home, and I'll defend it by whatever means necessary." Anna was silent for a long moment, processing all she'd learned. Finally, she asked, "Where are they? The guns from these pictures?" Catherine rose and moved to the fireplace, where she knelt and carefully removed a loose stone from the hearth. From the hidden cavity behind it, she withdrew an oilcloth-wrapped bundle. With reverent hands, she unfolded the cloth to reveal the matched pair of Colt peacemakers, their ivory grips and turquoise inlays catching the afternoon light. "Samuel Chen made these for me when I turned 25, she explained, her voice taking on a tone Anna had never heard before, something like reverence mixed with respect. "Balanced perfectly for my hands, customized to my exact specifications. I've never found their equal." Despite herself, Anna leaned forward, fascinated. "They're beautiful." "They're tools," Catherine corrected gently, "like any other. The beauty is in the craftsmanship, the precision. But make no mistake, they were made for killing." She wrapped them again, her movements precise and practiced. "And I pray you never see me use them." As twilight descended over the ranch, Catherine moved through a series of preparations with methodical efficiency. She reinforced the cabin's simple defenses, extra locks on the doors, furniture positioned to create cover if needed, lamps strategically placed to avoid casting her shadow against the windows. Anna watched, alternately helping and questioning, still struggling to reconcile the mother she knew with this new version who moved with such tactical precision. "What about Sheriff Callahan?" Anna asked as Catherine checked the Winchester for what seemed the 10th time. "Shouldn't we tell him what's happening?" "Wade is a good man," Catherine acknowledged, "but he's outnumbered and outgunned. If Mason sends his men in force, the sheriff can't stop them. Better he stays in town, keeps the peace there." A shrill whistle from outside interrupted them. 3 short blasts, the Henderson family's signal. Catherine moved to the window, rifle ready, then relaxed slightly. "It's young Billy Henderson," she told Anna, "riding hard." By the time they reached the porch, Billy was pulling his lathered horse to a stop in the yard. At 14, the boy was tall for his age, all gangly limbs and earnest expression. Tonight, however, his face was flushed with urgency. "Mrs. Sullivan," he called, dismounting in a rush. "Pa sent me to warn you. Riders headed this way from Shadow Creek, at least a dozen men all armed. They stopped at our place asking directions to your ranch. Pa told them the wrong way, sent them north toward the Badlands, but they'll figure it out soon enough." Catherine's expression hardened. "When was this, Billy?" "Not 20 minutes ago, ma'am. Pa told me to ride cross-country, take the deer trails, said I should tell you to get out while you can." Catherine placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did well, Billy. Thank your father for me. Now you head on home the back way. Stay off the main trails." After Billy galloped off, Catherine turned to Anna, decision made. "Pack only what you need. 1 bag, nothing you can't carry running. 5 minutes. "We're leaving?" Anna asked, surprised. "But you said—" "I said I wouldn't be driven out," Catherine corrected. "And I won't. But I need you safe first." As Anna hurried inside to pack, Catherine moved to the barn with swift purpose. She saddled 2 horses, Anna's pinto mare and her own reliable buckskin gelding. Into the saddlebags went ammunition, the oilcloth-wrapped Colts, basic provisions, and the small bag of gold coins she'd kept hidden for emergencies. When Anna emerged from the cabin, clutching a small carpet bag and wearing her riding clothes, Catherine was waiting with the horses. "We'll ride for Copper Canyon," she explained, helping Anna mount. "The old mining shack there is well hidden, easily defended. You'll be safe until I return." Anna's expression shifted from confusion to realization. "You're not staying with me." It wasn't a question, but Catherine answered anyway. "No. Once you're secure, I'm coming back. Mason wants a fight and I won't disappoint him." They rode hard through the gathering darkness, taking game trails and dry washes to avoid the main roads. Catherine led the way, her senses fully alert, constantly scanning for signs of pursuit or ambush. The matched Colts now rode at her hips, the familiar weight both comforting and sobering after so many years. Copper Canyon lay 10 miles northwest of their ranch, a maze of rust-colored rock formations and abandoned mining claims. Few people ventured there anymore. The copper had played out decades earlier, and the rugged terrain offered little to ranchers or farmers. But Catherine knew every twist and turn, having explored it thoroughly when they'd first settled in the area, always ensuring she had escape routes planned. The mining shack clung to a narrow ledge halfway up the canyon wall, accessible only by a switchback trail that could be easily defended or collapsed if necessary. As they approached, Catherine dismounted and led the horses the final stretch. checking for any signs that others had passed this way recently. The shack was as she remembered. Weathered but sound, with thick plank walls and a door that could be barricaded from inside. A small spring bubbled from the rock face nearby, ensuring water wouldn't be a concern. "It's not much," Catherine said as she helped Anna unsaddle her pinto, "but it's defensible. There are supplies cached inside, food, blankets, even books. To pass the time." Anna looked around the sparse shelter, then back at her mother, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I should come with you. We should face this together." Catherine shook her head firmly. "No, Vance and his men want our land, and they'll use any leverage they can find. If you're there, they'll use you against me." Her voice softened. "I can't. Invite the way I might need to if I'm worried about you, Anna. But you haven't. It's been years since—" Anna gestured helplessly at the guns on her mother's hips. "Some skills don't fade," Catherine replied, her voice taking on an edge Anna had never heard before. "They just hibernate until necessity awakens them." As she secured the horses in a sheltered alcove and helped Anna carry supplies into the shack, Catherine could feel the change happening within her, as if Widow Sullivan was slowly giving way to the woman she'd once been. Her movements became more fluid, more economical. Her awareness of her surroundings sharpened. Even her voice changed subtly, the gentle tones of a mother hardening into something more commanding. "I'll leave you my Winchester," she told Anna, checking the rifle one last time before placing it near the door. "You remember how to use it?" Anna nodded. Her father had taught her the basics of shooting before his death, and Catherine had continued those lessons, though never revealing her own extraordinary skills. "Aim for center mass, squeeze, don't pull, and only if there's no other choice," Anna recited. Catherine smiled faintly. "Thomas taught you well." She placed extra ammunition on the rough-hewn table. "I'll be back by dawn, with luck. If I'm not—" She hesitated. "If you're not," Anna prompted, fear evident in her voice, "wait 3 days, no more. Then take the North Trail to Hawkins Junction. Find Marshal Kingsley. He served with your father. He'll help you." As Catherine prepared to leave, Anna grabbed her arm. "Wait. At least tell me the truth before you go. That newspaper article, the one about 10 outlaws in 10 seconds, was that real? Did you really do that?" Catherine's expression grew distant, remembering. "Prescott, 72. The Blackwell gang tried to rob the Territorial Bank. I was working as a guard that day." She looked down at the Colts on her hips. 10 men, 10 shots, 10 seconds. I didn't miss." "How?" Anna whispered, both horrified and fascinated. "Practice," Catherine answered simply. "Hours every day for years. Your grandfather started teaching me to shoot when I was younger than you. Said a woman in the territories needed to protect herself. I took to it like I was born with a gun in my hand." She looked directly at her daughter, wanting her to understand. "It wasn't for glory, Anna. It was survival in a hard land. Then it became a job, a way to provide." "And now?" Anna asked. "What is it now?" Catherine checked her guns one final time, her movements smooth and practiced despite the years of disuse. "Now it's protection, for you, for our home." She kissed Anna's forehead. "Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me, and only if I give the signal. 3 knocks, pause, then 2. As Catherine rode away from the mining shack, the transformation completed itself. Widow Sullivan, the quiet rancher who baked bread on Saturdays and taught Sunday school, receded into the background. In her place rode quick-draw Catherine, her senses razor-sharp, her mind already calculating. Angles, approaches, tactics. The moon rose over the canyon, illuminating her path back toward the ranch. Catherine didn't follow the same route they'd taken earlier. Instead, she cut across the ridgeline, a path that would bring her to a vantage point overlooking her property. From there, she could assess the situation before engaging. As she rode, Catherine reflected on how quickly one could revert to old patterns when necessity demanded. 6 years of peace had not dulled her instincts as much as she'd feared. The weight of the Colts at her hips felt right, natural, as if the intervening years had been merely a brief interruption rather than a deliberate change of life. By the time she reached the ridge overlooking her ranch, full dark had settled. Below, Catherine could see lanterns moving about her property. At least a dozen men had taken over her home, their horses corralled in her pasture, smoke rising from her chimney. Anger flared hot and sharp at this invasion of the sanctuary she'd built for Anna. Through her field glasses, she studied their positions and movements, identifying Vance among them, apparently directing the others as they searched the buildings and grounds. They seemed frustrated, likely having expected to find her and Anna at home. As she watched, a familiar figure rode into the yard, the jittery young man who had been with Vance during their first visit. He dismounted quickly, hurrying to Vance's side with obvious urgency. Though too distant to hear their conversation, Catherine could read the body language. The younger man delivering news, Vance's posture stiffening with anger, rapid orders being issued. Within minutes, the men were mounting up, forming into 3 groups. Catherine's eyes narrowed as she recognized the tactical move. They were organizing a search pattern. Somehow, they must have learned about Anna's absence and were preparing to hunt for them. Catherine considered her options. Her original plan had been to wait, perhaps pick them off one by one from a distance if they refused to leave, but if they were splitting up to search the surrounding area, they might stumble upon Copper Canyon, upon Anna. New plan, then. She would need to draw their attention, keep it focused on her, away from Anna's hiding place. And there was one certain way to ensure that all eyes turned precisely where she wanted them. Catherine checked her Colts one final time, then urged her buckskin down the ridge toward her ranch. Quick Draw Catherine was about to announce her return. In a way, Vance and his men wouldn't soon forget. Meanwhile, at the Dusty Boot Saloon in Rattlesnake Gulch, an unusual tension had settled over the evening crowd. Word had spread quickly about Mason's men, asking after the Sullivan Ranch. And now the absence of Catherine and Anna had been noted with concern. Sheriff Wade Callahan stood at the bar, nursing a whiskey he hadn't really touched, his weathered face set in troubled lines. Beside him, Frank Garrett, the saloon keeper, leaned close to avoid being overheard. "Henderson boy rode in an hour ago. Said Mason's got at least a dozen men headed for the Sullivan place," Frank murmured. "You riding out, Wade?" The sheriff's hand tightened around his glass. 12 armed men, Frank. I'd need a posse, and half the men in town are on Mason's payroll these days. Sullivan woman and her girl are out there alone, Frank persisted. Ain't right, leaving them to Mason's tender mercies. You think I don't know that? Wade's voice held uncharacteristic sharpness. But rushing in half-cocked gets nobody saved. The batwing doors swung open, admitting a well-dressed man in his 60s, his silver hair and neatly trimmed beard giving him a distinguished appearance at odds with the frontier setting. Conversations faltered as Elijah Mason himself entered. The Dusty Boot, flanked by 2 armed men, Mason surveyed the saloon with the calculating gaze of a man accustomed to owning everything he saw. His eyes settled on Sheriff Callahan, a thin smile spreading across his face as he approached the bar. "Sheriff," he greeted, his voice cultured, almost courtly. "I trust the evening finds you well." Wade didn't respond immediately, measuring the man who had been systematically buying up or forcing out half the landowners in the territory. "Mr. Mason, don't often see you in Rattlesnake Gulch." "Business brings me to your charming community," Mason replied smoothly, signaling the bartender for a drink. "I've acquired some property in the area." "Acquired?" Wade's voice hardened. Strange word for sending armed men to threaten a widow and her daughter. Mason's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "A misunderstanding." I'm sure my representatives are merely negotiating a fair purchase of the Sullivan Ranch. The spring on that property is crucial for my development plans. Mrs. Sullivan made it clear the land isn't for sale, Wade countered, and your kind of negotiation usually leaves folks with burnt barns or broken bones. Mason accepted his whiskey from the bartender, taking an appreciative sip before responding. Strong accusation, Sheriff. I'd be careful about making them without evidence. The standoff between the two men drew every eye in the saloon. Mason, powerful and connected, represented the new order sweeping across the territory. Corporate interests, railroads, development at any cost. Wade Callahan stood for the old ways, individual rights, frontier justice, a code that valued people over profit. Let me be plain, Mason, Wade said, setting down his untouched whiskey. If any harm comes to Catherine Sullivan or her daughter, I'll hold you personally responsible. Mason's cultured veneer slipped slightly, revealing the ruthlessness beneath. Careful, Sheriff. Your jurisdiction has limits. So does your authority, and your badge doesn't make you bulletproof. The threat hung in the air, naked and undisguised. Wade's hand drifted toward his holster, an involuntary response to the menace. In Mason's voice, "Neither does your money, Mason," Wade replied, his voice steady despite the tension thrumming through the saloon. Before Mason could respond, the saloon doors burst open again. Billy Henderson stood there, chest heaving from his hard ride, his young face flushed with urgency. "Sheriff," he called, ignoring the crowded room. "They found Mrs. Sullivan's place empty, but they're tracking her and Anna now, heading toward Copper Canyon, Pa thinks." The blood drained from Wade's face. He knew those canyons. Treacherous. In daylight, deadly at night, especially for a woman and girl being hunted by experienced trackers. Mason's cold smile returned. "It seems Mrs. Sullivan has chosen to abandon her property rather than negotiate. Wise of her. My men will ensure she's compensated fairly for her cooperation." Wade turned on Mason. Any pretense of official restraint gone. "If your men harm a hair on either of their heads, there won't be a hole deep enough for you to hide in, governor or no governor backing you." With that, the sheriff strode toward the door, already calculating how many men he could muster for a posse. Knowing it wouldn't be enough against Mason's hired guns. As he reached the doorway, Mason called after him. "One more thing, Sheriff. You might ask yourself why Mrs. Sullivan is so attached to that worthless patch of dirt, or better yet, ask yourself who she really is. My sources tell me Catherine Sullivan isn't even her real name." Wade paused, the implications sinking in. "What are you talking about?" Mason's smile was triumphant now. Secure in the knowledge he held information the sheriff didn't. "Ask your Mrs. Sullivan about Prescott. About the bank robbery in '72. About why she changed her name from Sloan to Sullivan when she came here." The sheriff's brow furrowed, connecting fragments of memory. Catherine's uncommon self-sufficiency, her reluctance to engage with strangers, the way she handled a rifle with unusual proficiency during the town shooting competition last fall. "Quick draw, Catherine," Mason said softly, watching realization dawn on the sheriff's face. "The fastest gun in the Arizona Territory once upon a time. Retired, or so the stories say, after her husband's death. Seems she's been hiding right under. Your nose all along, Sheriff." Wade's mind raced, reassessing 6 years of knowing Catherine Sullivan in light of this revelation. If Mason was right, if she truly was the legendary quick-draw Catherine, then Mason's men were riding into something far more dangerous than they realized. The buckskin gelding picked its way silently through the rocky terrain as Catherine guided it toward her ranch, its hooves wrapped in burlap to muffle any sound. The familiar weight of the colts at her hips and the stillness of the desert night awakened memories Catherine had long suppressed. Nights spent guarding stagecoaches carrying gold shipments, tracking bandits through Apache country, standing in the center of a crowded square, as onlookers marveled at her speed and precision. From her vantage point in a copse of mesquite trees, Catherine surveyed her property. Lanterns illuminated the yard where 8 horses remained, meaning at least 4 riders had departed, likely to search for her and Anna. Inside the cabin, shadows moved across the windows. 2 men patrolled the perimeter, rifles in hand. Catherine touched the turquoise stone embedded in the left Colt's grip, a ritual she'd performed before every confrontation in her previous life. 6 years since she'd last drawn these weapons in anger, but her body remembered, muscles responding with familiar readiness. Her plan formed with cold precision: disable the perimeter guards silently, create a diversion at the barn, then confront. Vance inside the cabin, clean, direct, with minimal bloodshed if they were smart enough to yield. Catherine dismounted, securing the buckskin to a scrub oak. She removed her long duster, revealing the fitted leather vest underneath that allowed maximum mobility for her arms. Her hands moved automatically to check each bullet in her Colts, more from habit than necessity. She'd already ensured they were perfectly loaded with the specialized ammunition Samuel Chen had crafted specifically for these weapons. She began her approach, moving like a shadow among shadows, placing each foot with deliberate care to avoid dislodging stones or snapping twigs. The first guard never sensed her presence until the moment Catherine's arm locked around his throat from behind, cutting off both air and sound. She eased him to the ground as consciousness left him, quickly binding his hands and feet with leather straps and gagging him with his own bandana. The second guard proved more alert, turning toward a sound Catherine deliberately made. Before he could raise his rifle, she closed the distance between them, one hand deflecting the weapon while the other delivered a precise strike to the junction of neck and shoulder, a technique she'd learned from a Chinese miner in her stagecoach days. He collapsed without a sound, and Catherine secured him as she had the first. Now for the diversion. Catherine crept to the barn, retrieving a small jar of coal oil from her saddlebag. She soaked several rags, placing them strategically around the exterior of the structure, not to burn it down, but to create the impression of danger. One carefully placed flame near the hayloft would draw immediate attention. As she struck the match, Catherine heard the approaching hoofbeats, riders returning. She melted into the shadows behind the water trough, watching as 3 horsemen galloped into the yard, Vance's jittery young companion among them. Nothing at Copper Creek. He reported to someone in the doorway of the cabin. "Wilson's men are still checking Devil's Ridge. Keep looking." The voice from the doorway belonged to Vance, his tone sharp with frustration. "Mason wants them found by morning. The woman knows something about these canyons we don't." Catherine's diversion blazed to life, flames leaping up the side of the barn with dramatic effect. The reaction was immediate. Shouts of alarm, men pouring from the cabin, rushing toward the fire. Catherine used the chaos to slip behind them, entering the cabin through the kitchen door, while attention focused on the barn. Inside, she moved silently through the familiar space, now violated by alien presences. Mason's expensive brandy, open on her table, muddy boots on her clean floors, maps spread across surfaces where she and Anna had shared countless meals. Vance remained on the porch, barking orders about the fire. One man lingered inside, hurriedly gathering papers into a leather satchel. Catherine recognized him from descriptions she'd heard around town. Horace Linden, Mason's attorney, and the architect of his land acquisitions. He didn't notice her until she cocked both Colts, the distinctive double click freezing him in place. "Those papers concern my property," Catherine said, her voice eerily calm. "I suggest you leave them where you found them." Linden turned slowly, his pasty face draining further of color as he found himself staring down the barrels of Catherine's. "Legendary peacemakers, Mrs. Sullivan," he managed, voice quavering. "There seems to be a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Catherine cut him off. "You're trespassing. So are your associates. You have 1 minute to gather your men and ride out. Otherwise, I demonstrate why some legends never quite die. On the porch, Vance sensed something amiss and turned toward the door, his hand dropping instinctively to his holster. "I wouldn't," Catherine called, still focused on Lyndon but acutely aware of Vance's movement. "Not unless you're prepared to join the Blackwell gang in whatever hell awaits men who draw on me." Vance froze, recognition dawning in his eyes as he peered through the doorway. "It is you," he breathed. "Quick draw, Catherine." "In the flesh," she confirmed. "Now call your men off my barn and get them mounted up. You've worn out your welcome in Rattlesnake Gulch." Vance's expression shifted from shock to calculation. "You've been out of practice for years, living soft as a rancher's widow. Those reflexes slow down when they're not used." Catherine's smile never reached her eyes. "Care to test that theory?" The standoff stretched taut as a fiddle string, Catherine holding both men in her sights, Vance measuring his chances from the doorway. The fire at the barn sputtered out, designed for show rather than destruction, and confused voices called to Vance for instruction. "You're outnumbered," Vance said finally. 8-1. "I've faced worse odds," Catherine replied. Memories of Prescott flashing through her mind. "And I'm only aiming to kill those who force my hand, starting with you, Vance, if your fingers so much as twitch toward that gun." Before Vance could respond, hoofbeats pounded into the yard. More riders, arriving, multiple horses moving at speed. Catherine maintained her position, senses stretched to their limit as she tried to identify the newcomers without taking her eyes off the immediate threats. "That'll be Wilson and the rest of Mason's men," Vance said, confidence returning to his voice. "They've been searching the canyons. If they've found your daughter—" The threat hung unfinished as fury flashed across Catherine's face. Her left Colt swung toward a glass lamp on the table beside Vance, firing with such speed that he hadn't even registered the movement before the lamp exploded, showering him with glass and oil. Her right Colt remained steady on Lyndon, who had gone utterly still, briefcase forgotten in his nerveless fingers. "Next one takes your ear off," Catherine promised Vance, her voice deadly quiet. "Don't speak of my daughter again." Outside, a new voice called out, authoritative and unexpected. "Mason's men, this is Sheriff Wade Callahan. You're surrounded by a territorial posse. Throw down your weapons and come out with your hands visible." Relief washed through Catherine. The arriving riders weren't more of Mason's men, but reinforcements of a most welcome kind. Still, she kept her Colts trained on Vance and Lyndon, unwilling to trust in salvation until she saw it with her own eyes. The next moments unfolded in a blur of shouted orders, the clatter of dropped weapons and the shuffling of reluctant men. Being taken into custody. Vance's face twisted with hatred as he realized his position had collapsed. "This isn't over," he hissed at Catherine. Mason will what?" The cultured voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Elijah Mason himself stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed despite the late hour, his silver hair gleaming in the lamplight. Behind him, Sheriff Callahan kept a revolver pressed to the land baron's back. Catherine's expression registered genuine surprise for the first time that night. "You brought Mason himself, Wade. That's unexpected." "Found him riding out this way with a small escort," the sheriff explained, nudging Mason farther into the room. "Seemed like he might want to witness the fruits of his labor firsthand." Mason's aristocratic features betrayed nothing as he surveyed the scene. His attorney frozen under Catherine's unwavering aim, Vance half-drenched in lamp oil, and the widow herself standing in the center of her home, deadly as a rattlesnake and twice as quick. "Mrs. Sullivan," Mason acknowledged with a slight nod. "Or should I say, Mrs. Sloane, your reputation precedes you, though I confess I thought the stories of Quick-Draw Catherine were somewhat exaggerated." "Most stories are," Catherine agreed, not lowering her weapons despite the sheriff's presence. "The true ones need no embellishment." Mason's calculating gaze took in every detail of the situation. "Where is your daughter, Mrs. Sloane? My men reported the place empty when they arrived." "Somewhere you'll never find her," Catherine answered coldly. "And it's Sullivan now. Has been for 6 years." Sheriff Callahan gestured for his deputies to take charge of Linden and Vance. "Mason here was quite informative on the ride over once. He realized the territorial marshal is due tomorrow with warrants for his arrest. Land fraud, coercion, bribery of officials, quite a list." Mason's composed facade cracked slightly. "Hearsay and conjecture, Sheriff. Nothing that will stand in court. We'll let the judge decide that," Wade replied. "Meanwhile, you've been caught red-handed orchestrating an armed invasion of a private residence." As Vance and Linden were led, outside, Catherine finally lowered her Colts, though she kept them in hand, her gaze fixed on Mason. "You came all this way for my spring. Why this property specifically? There are other water sources." Mason studied her for a moment, aristocrat to gunslinger, power recognizing power across the divide of class and circumstance. "Your spring feeds the entire eastern aquifer. Railroad surveys confirmed it last month. Control that water. Control the railroad route. Control the future. Simple economics, Mrs. Sullivan. Nothing personal." "It became personal when you threatened my daughter," Catherine replied, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. Mason smiled thinly. "Business requires leverage. You'll understand that, having once made your living in a world of calculated risks." He adjusted his brocade vest with his one free hand, maintaining dignity despite his circumstances. "I underestimated you. A rare miscalculation on my part." "One that's cost you considerably," Catherine observed. "Even if you escape prison, your reputation is damaged. Mason the Invincible, brought down by a widow with a pair of 6-shooters. Something dangerous flashed in Mason's eyes. "You've won the battle, Mrs. Sullivan." The war, however, his hand moved with surprising speed, reaching inside his vest. Catherine's response was faster than thought. Her right Colt fired, the bullet grazing Mason's hand before he could withdraw whatever he was reaching for. The weapon discharged again immediately, this time sending Mason's expensive hat flying from his head. Sheriff Callahan yanked Mason backward, slamming him against the wall and quickly searching his vest, to reveal an ornate derringer, small but lethal at close range. "Jesus, Catherine," Wade breathed, staring at the neat hole in Mason's hat where it had landed on the floor. "That was—" "Quick draw, Catherine," Mason finished, clutching his bleeding hand, shock and reluctant admiration mingling in his expression. The legends, it seems, were understated. Outside, the posse had secured the remaining men. The night that had begun with invasion and threat was ending with justice. However rough-hewn, Catherine holstered her Colts with a fluid motion that spoke of thousands of hours of practice, muscles remembering what the conscious mind had tried to forget. "I need to retrieve Anna," she told Wade, already moving toward the door. "I'll send deputies with you," the sheriff offered. Catherine shook her head. "No need. No one followed me there, and your men are needed here to guard your prisoners." She paused at the threshold, looking back at Mason, now securely bound and seated in her kitchen chair. "When I return, we'll discuss how you're going. To sign over the water rights for the entire Eastern Valley to the Rattlesnake Gulch Town Council permanently." Mason's eyes widened. "That's highway robbery." "No," Catherine corrected, something of her old self gleaming in her eyes. "That's the price for threatening my family and living to tell about it. Consider yourself fortunate. The Blackwell gang paid a steeper price for a lesser offense." The ride to Copper Canyon seemed faster than the journey out had been, urgency, giving way to relief as Catherine pushed her buckskin toward the rising dawn. The stars were fading from the sky by the time she reached the hidden trail leading to the mining shack. "Anna!" she called as she approached, using their signal, 3 knocks, pause, 2 more. The door opened cautiously, revealing Anna's face, the Winchester clutched in her hands. When she saw her mother, unharmed and alone, she dropped the rifle and rushed forward, throwing her arms around Catherine. "You're safe," Anna breathed, pulling back to examine her mother's face. "What happened? Did they come? Did you have to—" Catherine gently disentangled herself, leading Anna back inside the shack. They came. Sheriff Callahan arrived with a posse. Mason and his men are in custody. She omitted the details of confrontation. The speed of her draw, the perfect accuracy of her shots. Those stories could wait, or perhaps never need telling at all. "So it's over?" Anna asked, hope brightening her features. "We can go home." "It's over," Catherine confirmed, though she knew that wasn't entirely true. Her secret was exposed now. Quick-draw Catherine had returned in spectacular fashion. Life in Rattlesnake Gulch would never be quite the same. As they packed their meager supplies and prepared to ride home, Anna studied her mother with new eyes, seeing not just the gentle widow who had raised her, but glimpses of the legendary gunslinger whose skills had protected them both. "Those guns," Anna said finally, nodding toward the Colts at Catherine's hips. "Will you lock them away again? Go back to being just Mrs. Sullivan?" Catherine touched the turquoise inlay thoughtfully. "I don't know if we can ever go back, Anna. The past has a way of catching up, no matter how far or fast you run." The sun crested the canyon walls as they rode out, mother and daughter side by side, heading toward a future neither could clearly envision, one where secrets had been exposed, legends reborn, and new choices awaited in the harsh light of day. 3 days after the confrontation at the Sullivan Ranch, Rattlesnake Gulch buzzed with activity unusual for the sleepy frontier town. The arrival of Territorial Marshal James Harker with a contingent of deputies had transformed the modest jailhouse into a hub of legal proceedings. Mason and his men occupied every available cell, with additional prisoners housed in a hastily constructed stockade behind the sheriff's office. Catherine Sullivan, or Sloane, as some now whispered, sat on her porch, watching the sunset. Paint the mesas with golden light. The matched Colts no longer hung at her hips. They were clean, oiled, and returned to their hiding place. But unlike before, their presence in the house was no longer a closely guarded secret. The sound of approaching hooves drew her attention. A lone rider made his way up the path to her ranch, Sheriff Wade Callahan, his posture betraying exhaustion after days of managing the aftermath of Mason's failed land grab. "Evening, Catherine," he called as he dismounted, tying his horse to the hitching post. "Thought you'd want to know the latest news," Catherine gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Sit before you fall down, Wade. You look like you haven't slept since the arrest." The sheriff settled into the offered seat with a grateful sigh. Close to truth. Marshal Harker's been taking depositions round the clock. Mason's attorney started talking once the evidence piled up. Seems he kept meticulous records of every illegal transaction, every bribe, every threat. Insurance, he called it. "Smart man," Catherine observed. "Honor among thieves is a myth, best not relied upon." Wade studied her profile in the fading light, seeing both the widow he'd known for 6 years and the legend he'd only recently discovered. "Mason's being transferred to Prescott tomorrow to stand trial. The judge there is no friend of land barons, regardless of their political connections." Catherine nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. "And Vance?" "Facing charges of attempted murder, trespassing, destruction of property, and conspiracy." Wade counted off the offenses on his fingers. "He'll hang or spend 20 years in Yuma Territorial Prison." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the evening breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "Where's Anna?" Wade asked finally. "Inside, writing letters to her friends in town, explaining why she wasn't at school this week." Catherine's smile held a hint of sadness. "Though I imagine they've heard plenty already about why the Sullivan women were absent." The sheriff nodded, acknowledging the unavoidable truth. Word spreads fast. Quick-draw Catherine, living right here in Rattlesnake Gulch all this time. Folks can't stop talking about it. And what are they saying, Wade? Catherine asked quietly, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Wade considered his words carefully. Some are impressed, even a bit starstruck. Your reputation wasn't just about speed. You protected stagecoaches, caught outlaws, kept ordinary folks safe. Others are processing the revelation, wondering why you kept it secret, what else you might be hiding. And you, Sheriff, what do you think of having a notorious gunslinger in your jurisdiction? There was a challenge in her question, though her voice remained mild. I think, Wade said slowly, that I've known Catherine Sullivan for 6 years, watched her raise a daughter alone, build a ranch from nothing, contribute to this community in a dozen quiet ways. Whatever name you used before, whatever life you led, that's the woman I know. He turned to face her directly. The question is, what happens now? Catherine's gaze drifted toward the distant mesas. I've been asking myself the same thing since that night. Will the good people of Rattlesnake Gulch accept having quick-draw Catherine in their midst? Will they let their children play with Anna, now that they know her mother's history? Or will the whispers start, the sideways glances, the crossed streets? To avoid passing too close. Before Wade could answer, the front door opened and Anna stepped onto the porch. At 16, she carried herself with a new maturity, the events of recent days having accelerated her passage from girl to young woman. Sheriff, she greeted Wade with a respectful nod. Ma, Mr. Garrett sent word that our supply order is ready. In town, but he said to tell you there's no rush. He'll hold it as long as needed. The implication was clear. Frank Garrett was offering Catherine the option to delay her return to town until the initial shock and curiosity had subsided. Thank you, Anna, Catherine replied. Tell him we'll be in tomorrow. No sense delaying the inevitable. After Anna returned inside, Wade studied Catherine's resolute expression. You're really planning to stay, then? You're not running this time? We've made a home here, Catherine said simply. Running solved nothing last time. It only postponed this reckoning. Her hand drifted unconsciously to her side, where the Colt had hung for so many years. Besides, I'm tired of hiding who I am, Wade. Living half a life, always looking over my shoulder, waiting for the past to find me. The sheriff nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Rattlesnake Gulch needs good people, regardless of their history. As darkness settled over the ranch, Wade took his leave, promising to return the following day to escort Catherine and Anna into town, an offer of support that carried meaning beyond mere courtesy. Catherine remained on the porch long after he'd gone, contemplating the stars emerging one by one in the vast desert sky. 6 years ago, after Thomas's death, she'd believed that burying quick-draw Catherine was the only way to give Anna a normal life. Now, with that carefully constructed facade shattered, she faced a future where her two identities would need to coexist, not in conflict, but in harmony. Inside, the soft glow of lamplight illuminated Anna at the kitchen table, her schoolbooks open before her, though her attention seemed elsewhere. Catherine paused in the doorway, taking in the sight of her daughter, so like Thomas in her thoughtful expression, so like herself in her quiet determination. You should be sleeping, Catherine observed, moving to put the kettle on the stove. Tomorrow will be a long day. Anna closed her book, meeting her mother's gaze directly. Will it be very difficult? Going into town, facing everyone. Catherine considered the question, unwilling to offer false reassurance. It won't be easy. People will stare. Some will whisper. Some may avoid us entirely. Because they're afraid of you? Anna's voice held a complex mixture of pride and concern. Some, perhaps. Others because they'll feel deceived. Catherine sat across from her daughter, hands folded on the worn wooden table. When people think they know you, discovering they were wrong, even partly wrong, can feel like a betrayal. Anna was silent for a moment, absorbing this. Would it have been better if you told them from the beginning, if you hadn't hidden who you were? The question cut to the heart of the choice Catherine had made 6 years earlier, the choice that now seemed increasingly difficult to defend, even to herself. "I don't know," she admitted. "When your father died, all I wanted was peace for us both. A place where you could grow up without the shadow of my reputation hanging over you, where you wouldn't be Quickdraw Catherine's daughter before you were Anna Sullivan." "But I am her daughter," Anna pointed out, a new certainty in her voice. "Hiding it didn't change that. It just meant I didn't know half of who I am, who we are." The kettle whistled, giving Catherine a moment to compose herself as she prepared 2 cups of tea, adding a spoonful of precious honey to Anna's, a small luxury they allowed themselves even in lean times. "You're right," Catherine acknowledged, returning to the table. "I thought I was protecting you, but perhaps I was only postponing an inevitable truth." She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, drawing comfort from its familiar weight. "I won't make that mistake again, Anna. No more secrets between us." Anna nodded, satisfied with this promise. "So tomorrow we ride into town together, as the Sullivans, as ourselves. And if people can't accept that, it's their loss." Catherine couldn't help but smile at her daughter's straightforward resolution. "When did you become so wise?" "Must have inherited it," Anna replied with a hint of mischief, "along with other talents I'm just beginning to discover." Her expression grew more serious. "Will you teach me, Ma? Not just about shooting, but everything. How to read tracks, how to move silently, how to know when trouble's coming before it arrives." Catherine studied her daughter's face, recognizing the determination that had once driven her own training. "You're sure that's what you want? Once you learn these things, you can't unlearn them. They change how you see the world, how you move through it." "I'm sure," Anna said firmly. "I've spent 16 years not knowing half of who my mother is. I don't want to spend another day in that kind of ignorance." As they finished their tea, Catherine found herself mapping out a training regimen in her mind, not to create another Quickdraw Catherine, but to give Anna the skills to navigate a world that wasn't always kind to women alone. It was, she realized, a gift she could offer now that the walls between her past and present had crumbled. The following morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect autumn day that made the harshness of desert life seem worth its challenges. Catherine dressed with particular care, not in the severe black of widowhood she'd affected for years, but in a deep blue riding skirt and jacket that complemented her silver-streaked hair. The outfit was practical, allowing freedom of movement, but undeniably feminine. Ina, watching her mother's transformation with fascination, opted for her best Sunday dress, her dark hair braided and pinned in a style that emphasized her transition. "You're from girl to young woman. No guns today?" Anna asked, noticing the absence of the Colts. Catherine shook her head. "Not today. This visit isn't about Quickdraw Catherine making a grand return. It's about Catherine Sullivan, all of her, taking her proper place in the community." Sheriff Callahan arrived precisely when promised, bringing news that heightened the significance of their journey into town. "Mason signed the water rights over to the town council this morning," he announced as they mounted up. "In perpetuity, with no compensation. Seems he's hoping for leniency from the territorial judge." Catherine's eyebrows rose in surprise. "He must be desperate indeed. Mason doesn't strike me as a man who surrenders valuable assets without exhausting every option." "Marshal Harker can be mighty persuasive," Wade replied with a satisfied smile, "especially with a stack of evidence that could send a man to prison for 3 lifetimes. But there's more. The town council has called an emergency meeting at noon. They've asked specifically for your presence. A flicker of apprehension crossed Catherine's face. To what end? They wouldn't say, but Martha Garrett seemed pleased about whatever they're planning. The sheriff studied her reaction. You're not worried, are you? The Catherine Sullivan I know doesn't frighten easily. Neither does quick-draw Catherine, she replied with a wry smile. But facing down armed outlaws is sometimes easier than facing a community's judgment. The ride to town was too short for Catherine's liking, each hoofbeat bringing them closer to a reckoning she had postponed for 6 years. As they crested the final rise overlooking Rattlesnake Gulch, she drew her horse to a halt, taking in the sight of the frontier town spread below. No longer just a place of residence, but truly her home for better or worse. Ready? Wade asked, noting her hesitation. Catherine straightened in the saddle, her chin lifting in a gesture that Anna immediately recognized as her mother, embracing her full strength. As I'll ever be, she replied, and nudged her horse forward. Their entrance into town drew immediate attention. Conversations halted as heads turned, tracking their progress down Main Street. Catherine maintained a dignified posture, acknowledging greetings with a polite nod, but not slowing until they reached Garrett's general store. Frank Garrett stood in the doorway, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile as they approached. "Mrs. Sullivan," he called, deliberately using the name she had chosen for her new life. "And Miss Anna, your supplies are all ready, but I hope you'll join Martha for coffee before loading up." The invitation, public and unmistakable, was more than mere hospitality. It was a declaration of acceptance, a signal to the watching town that the Garrett family, respected pillars of the community, saw nothing changed in their relationship with Catherine despite the revelations of recent days. Inside the store, Martha Garrett embraced both Catherine and Anna with genuine warmth. "Lord, girl, you've had us worried," she exclaimed, leading them to the back room where coffee and fresh-baked cinnamon rolls waited. "Next time you're facing down a dozen armed men, maybe send word so your friends can bring more than moral support." Catherine found herself unexpectedly moved by this casual acceptance. "Next time I'll be sure to issue formal invitations," she replied, matching Martha's light tone while gratitude tightened her throat. "See that you do," Martha said firmly, pouring coffee into delicate china cups that seemed incongruous in the frontier setting. "Now, about this town council meeting, have you any idea what they're planning?" Catherine shook her head, accepting the offered cup. "Wade says they've requested my presence, but nothing more." Martha's expression turned mysterious. "Well, I've heard things, being married to a councilman and all, but I'll let them make their own announcement." She turned to Anna. "Meanwhile, young lady, I've a new shipment of fabric from back east that might interest a girl who needs a dress for the harvest dance. Care to have a look?" As Anna followed Martha into the store proper, Frank lowered his voice, addressing Catherine directly. "You should know, most folks around here are more impressed than scandalized by learning who you really are. Quick-draw Catherine was something of a legend in these parts, even before you arrived." Catherine sipped her coffee, using the moment to gather her thoughts. "And those who aren't impressed?" Frank shrugged his substantial shoulders. "Can't please everyone. Never could. But those worth caring about judge folks by their actions, not their pasts. You've been a good neighbor, Catherine, whatever name you're using." Before their conversation could continue, the town bell began to ring, signaling noon and the start of the council meeting. Catherine set down her cup, squaring her shoulders for whatever awaited her at the town hall. Outside, she found the street considerably more crowded than when they'd arrived. Word of the meeting had spread, drawing what appeared to be most of Rattlesnake Gulch's population. Rather than parting to let her pass, the crowd seemed to flow with her, an escort rather than an obstacle. At the town hall steps, Sheriff Callahan waited, Anna at his side. The girl's expression held a hint of excitement that suggested Martha had shared at least some of what was to come. Council's waiting. Wade said, offering Catherine his arm in a formal gesture rarely seen in the casual. Frontier town, shall we? With her daughter on one side and the sheriff on the other, Catherine ascended the steps, ready to face whatever judgment the community had deemed appropriate for a legend who had hidden among them for 6 years. Inside, the 5-member town council sat at their usual table, Mayor Henry Parker at the center. The room was packed with townspeople, all eyes turning to Catherine as she entered. The scrutiny was intense, but not hostile, more curious than condemning. Mrs. Sullivan, Mayor Parker began, using her chosen name with deliberate emphasis. Or perhaps I should say Mrs. Sloane. The council has requested your presence to address matters arising from recent events. Catherine stood straight, hands clasped before her, the dignity of her bearing a shield against whatever might come. I'm here to answer any questions the council may have, she replied, her voice carrying clearly through the crowded room. Mayor. Parker exchanged glances with his fellow council members before continuing. Recent events have demonstrated both a threat to our community and an unexpected resource within it. Elijah Mason's attempt to seize control of our water rights has been thwarted, thanks in no small part to your particular skills. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. This council has been entrusted with protecting the future of Rattlesnake Gulch, Parker continued, and in light of recent developments, we wish to make you a proposition, Mrs. Sullivan. Catherine's expression remained composed, though her mind raced with possibilities. Censure disguised as opportunity, perhaps, or conditions placed upon her continued residence. With the railroad coming next year, Parker explained, our peaceful town faces increased traffic, new settlers, and inevitable growing pains. Sheriff Callahan has served us well, but one man cannot oversee our expanding jurisdiction. Wade shifted beside Catherine, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He'd known what was coming, she realized. Therefore, the mayor continued, this council unanimously proposes the creation of a new position, Deputy Marshal of Rattlesnake Gulch and the Eastern Territories, with special responsibility for ranch lands beyond the town proper, and we would like to offer this position to you, Mrs. Sullivan. The room fell silent as Catherine absorbed the unexpected offer. Not judgment or exile, but official recognition of the very skills she had hidden for so long. You want to make me a law woman? She asked, unable to fully mask her surprise. A woman with my history? We want to make you exactly what you've already proven yourself to be, Parker replied, a defender of this community, regardless of what name you use or what past you carry. As the implications of the offer sank in, Catherine felt something shift within her. The two halves of her life, so long kept separate, beginning at last to merge into a coherent whole. 3 months after the town council's unexpected offer, winter had settled over the Arizona territory, bringing rare snowfall that dusted the mesas with white and turned Rattlesnake Gulch into a scene from an Eastern Christmas card. The transformation of the landscape mirrored the changes in Catherine Sullivan's life, gradual yet profound, familiar yet entirely new. The silver badge pinned to her vest caught the morning light as she completed her inspection of the new jail addition. The expanded facility had been deemed necessary with the coming railroad, a prudent preparation for the inevitable influx of drifters, opportunists, and troublemakers that steel rails always seemed to attract. Looks solid enough, she commented to the carpenter Simon Fletcher, who beamed with pride at her approval. Good sight lines from the desk to all cells. No blind spots in the corridors. Designed it with security in mind, Marshal Sullivan, Fletcher replied, emphasizing her official title with evident satisfaction. No outlaws going to slip out of this lockup. Catherine nodded, making a final notation in her logbook. Her official title was Deputy Marshal, but the townsfolk had taken to simplifying it in daily conversation. After initial hesitation, she'd accepted the position offered by the town council, negotiating specific terms that allowed her to maintain her ranch while overseeing security for the outlying territories beyond Sheriff Callahan's jurisdiction. The arrangement had proven surprisingly effective. Wade handled the day-to-day matters in town, while Catherine's reputation alone deterred most trouble in the surrounding ranchlands. When situations did arise requiring her attention, they were typically resolved without gunfire. The mere presence of the woman once known as Quick-Draw Catherine proved sufficient to cool most hot heads. "Ma!" Anna's voice called from outside. "Telegram from Prescott." Catherine stepped out into the winter sunshine to find her daughter mounted on her pinto mare, breath fogging in the cold air. At nearly 17, Anna had blossomed in recent months, her natural confidence no longer overshadowed by family secrets. She wore her riding clothes with the ease of a young woman comfortable in her own skin, a modified gun belt around her waist, not carrying pistols like her mother's, but a practical single Remington and a hunting knife. Catherine accepted the telegram, breaking the seal, while Anna waited expectantly. Her expression remained neutral as she read, though a subtle tension around her eyes betrayed the significance of the message. "Mason's trial concluded," she informed Anna, tucking the telegram into her vest pocket. "Guilty on all counts, 20 years in territorial prison, assets seized to compensate his victims." Anna studied her mother's face. "That's good news, isn't it? Why don't you look pleased?" Catherine glanced around the busy main street, where townsfolk went about their morning business. Some nodded respectfully as they passed, the silver badge now as much a part of her identity in their eyes as her skill with horses or her Sunday school teaching. "Walk with me," she said to Anna, leading their horses toward the edge of town, where conversation could be more private. Once beyond curious ears, Catherine explained, Mason had powerful friends, men who won't easily forgive those responsible for his downfall. Anna frowned, processing this new concern. "You think they'll seek revenge? Come after you?" "Perhaps," Catherine acknowledged. "Or perhaps not. Men like Mason's associates typically avoid direct confrontation, preferring to work through intermediaries, exploit weaknesses." She glanced at her daughter. "This is why I've been teaching you what I know, not to make you a gunfighter, but to ensure you can recognize danger, in whatever form it takes." Over the past months, Catherine had begun Anna's education in the skills that had once made Quick-Draw Catherine legendary. Not just shooting, though the girl showed remarkable aptitude with firearms, but tracking, reading people, situational awareness, and the 100 subtle abilities that kept one alive in dangerous times. "I've been thinking about that," Anna said as they reached the overlook that provided a view of their ranch in the distance. "About what happens next, for both of us." Catherine raised an eyebrow, waiting for her daughter to continue. "Mrs. Henderson received a letter from her sister in San Francisco," Anna explained. "There's a women's college there accepting applications for the fall term. Studies in literature, sciences, even medicine for those qualified." "You're considering applying?" Catherine surmised, studying her daughter's expression. Anna nodded, a mixture of excitement and uncertainty in her features. "Before, when I thought we were just simple ranchers, my future seemed clear. Marriage, children, perhaps taking over the ranch someday. But now—" She gestured vaguely, encompassing the changes of recent months. "Now I know our family story is about more than just surviving. It's about forging your own path, even when the world doesn't expect it of you." Pride swelled in Catherine's chest, momentarily overwhelming any concern about their separation. "Your father would be proud of your ambition," she said softly. "He always believed education was wasted on sons alone." "But what about you?" Anna pressed. "If I go to San Francisco, you'd be here alone." Catherine smiled, touched by her daughter's concern. "I managed alone for many years before you were born, Anna, and I'm hardly alone here now." She nodded toward the town below. Besides, everyone deserves their own legend. Mine isn't meant to be yours. Their conversation was interrupted by approaching hoofbeats, a rider coming fast along the trail from the direction of Copper Canyon. Catherine's hand drifted instinctively toward her holster, relaxing only when she recognized young Billy Henderson, now 17, and working as the town's telegraph operator when not helping at his family's ranch. "Marshal Sullivan," he called, reining his horse to a stop beside them. "Sheriff sent me to find you. Stagecoach from Tucson was robbed at Sidewinder Pass. Driver killed, passengers stranded." Catherine was immediately alert, all maternal reflection pushed aside by professional duty. Casualties? 2 passengers wounded but alive. Rest are sheltering at the way station. Billy's face was flushed with the urgency of his news. "Sheriff's organizing a posse, but he said to tell you the robbers left a distinctive calling card." "What? Own kind of calling card?" Catherine asked, though something in her expression suggested she already anticipated the answer. "Ace of spades," Billy replied, confirming her suspicion. "Sheriff said you'd know what that meant." Indeed she did. The ace of spades had been the signature of the Blackwell gang, the same outfit she'd famously dispatched during the Prescott bank robbery years ago. But the gang's leader, Cornelius Blackwell, had escaped that day, the one man who'd run rather than draw against her. He'd disappeared from the territories, rumored to have fled to Mexico or California. "If it's truly Blackwell," Catherine said, thinking aloud, "he's either grown very bold or very desperate to return to this territory. Or someone's using his methods to send you a message," Anna suggested, displaying the strategic thinking Catherine had been cultivating in her. Catherine nodded, considering the possibility. "Either way, it requires investigation." She turned to Billy. "Tell the sheriff I'll meet the posse at Coyote Creek in 1 hour." As Billy rode back toward town, Catherine faced her daughter, seeing in her eyes the same question that had haunted their relationship for years. Would Catherine ride into danger while Anna remained behind, waiting and wondering? "Come with me," Catherine said, making a decision that would have been unthinkable months ago. "Not on the pursuit itself, but to the way station. The passengers will need tending, and you've become skilled with field medicine." Anna's expression brightened, recognizing this invitation as the significant gesture it was. Catherine acknowledging her daughter's growing capabilities, trusting her judgment in potentially dangerous situations. "I'll get my medical kit," Anna replied, already turning her horse toward home. An hour later, Catherine rode at the head of an 8-man posse, her deputy's badge catching the winter sunlight, the matched Colts secured at her hips. Anna rode beside her, a rifle scabbarded on her saddlebags containing bandages, tinctures, and the herbal remedies Catherine had taught her to prepare. Word of the robbery had spread through town, drawing onlookers as the posse prepared to depart. Among them stood Martha Garrett, who stepped forward as Catherine adjusted her saddle. "Be careful out there," Martha said, her usual brisk manner softened by genuine concern. "Blackwell, if it is him, always was more snake than man." Catherine nodded, appreciating the warning. "We'll proceed with caution. Should be back by nightfall." Martha lowered her voice, glancing at Anna, who was checking her medical supplies. "You sure about taking her along? Blackwell might remember you have a daughter." "I'm sure," Catherine replied with quiet conviction. "She needs to see this part of the work too, not just the badge and the authority, but the responsibility that comes with them." Her gaze followed Anna's efficient movements. "Besides, she's ready, more ready than I was at her age." The way station at Sidewinder Pass was a sturdy adobe structure nestled against red rock cliffs, designed to provide shelter for stagecoach passengers and fresh horses for the arduous journey between settlements. As the posse approached, Catherine noted the overturned stagecoach, its team unhitched but tethered nearby, the driver's body respectfully covered with a blanket. The station master, a grizzled veteran of the frontier named Tobias Hayes, greeted them at the door, shotgun in hand, until he recognized Catherine's badge. "Thank the Lord you've come, Marshal," he said, relief evident in his weather-beaten face. "Got 5 passengers inside, 2 with bullet wounds, lady with a shot through her shoulder, and a gentleman grazed his head. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but they need proper medical attention." Catherine dismounted, gesturing for Anna to follow. "My daughter has training in field medicine. She'll tend to the wounded while we track the robbers." Inside the way station, the passengers huddled around a potbelly stove. A well-dressed couple from San Francisco, a traveling salesman, and 2 sisters who'd been journeying to visit family in Tucson. The injured woman lay on a makeshift cot, her husband hovering anxiously nearby. Anna moved toward them with quiet confidence, introducing herself and immediately assessing the wounds. Catherine watched with pride as her daughter competently cleaned and dressed the injuries, her gentle manner calming the distressed travelers. "What happened here exactly?" Catherine asked Hayes, who had followed them inside. The station master shook his head grimly. 4 men, faces covered, ambushed the stage about a mile east. Shot poor Jenkins off the box before he could even reach for his scattergun. Passengers said the leader never spoke, just passed a note demanding valuables, then left that playing card behind. "Did they take anything besides money and jewelry?" Catherine pressed, her instincts sharpening. Hayes glanced toward the passengers. Lady's husband there was carrying documents, land deeds for property near the planned railroad station in Rattlesnake Gulch. The connection crystallized in Catherine's mind. Mason's associates picking up where he had left off, using Blackwell's methods as cover for their real objective, controlling strategic properties along the railroad's planned route. While the rest of the posse prepared to follow the robbers' trail, Catherine took a moment with Anna, explaining her suspicions in a low voice. "This may be less about Blackwell's return, and more about Mason's allies continuing his work," she concluded. "Be vigilant while I'm gone. If I'm right, they staged this robbery specifically to draw me away from town, away from you." Anna nodded, understanding the implication. "I'll keep my Remington close and my eyes open." Catherine squeezed her daughter's shoulder, then rejoined the posse outside. As they mounted up to follow the fresh tracks leading east into the rough country beyond the pass, she found Sheriff Callahan riding alongside her. "You're thinking what I'm thinking?" he asked quietly. "This has Mason's stink all over it, Blackwell card or no." "Exactly," Catherine confirmed, "which means we could be riding into a trap, with the real target being what we've left behind." Wade's expression hardened. "I left 4 deputies in town, armed and alert. If anyone makes a move there, they'll find more resistance than they bargained for." The tracks led them on a winding path through the Badlands, sometimes clear in the light, dusting of snow, other times nearly invisible against the rocky terrain. Catherine's tracking skills proved invaluable, her years riding as a Wells Fargo guard having honed her ability to read sign that others missed entirely. By mid-afternoon, they'd followed the trail to a box canyon with sheer walls rising hundreds of feet on 3 sides. Catherine held up her hand, signaling the posse to halt at the canyon's entrance. "This isn't right," she said, studying the unbroken trail leading directly into the natural trap. "No outlaw worth his salt would corner himself like this." She dismounted, examining the tracks more carefully. After a moment, she straightened, certainty in her expression. "These tracks are deliberate, too perfect, too obvious. Someone's leading us exactly where they want us to go." "An ambush?" Wade asked, scanning the canyon walls where numerous ledges and outcroppings could conceal. "Gunmen, almost certainly," Catherine confirmed. "And while we're pinned down here, the real attack happens back in town," Wade finished, understanding immediately. Catherine remounted, addressing the posse with quiet authority. "Sheriff Callahan and I are returning to Rattlesnake Gulch. The rest of you maintain position here, but do not enter that canyon. If the robbers emerge, track them, but do not engage without reinforcements." As they rode hard back toward town, Catherine shared her expanding theory with Wade. Mason's associates are using Blackwell's methods as misdirection. They want revenge for Mason's conviction, but they're also continuing his plan to control the railroad route, using the chaos of a stagecoach robbery to cover their real objective, Wade agreed. Clever, if ruthless. "There's more," Catherine added, her expression grim. Before Mason's arrest, he mentioned having files on everyone in the territory with strategic property, including me, meaning they'd know about your past, Wade realized, and might try to use it against you, or use Anna as leverage. Catherine's response was to urge her horse to greater speed, fear for her daughter overriding all other concerns. They arrived at the way station to find a scene of calm efficiency. Anna had fully treated both wounded passengers and organized the others for the journey into town once the replacement stagecoach arrived from Rattlesnake Gulch. "Any trouble here?" Catherine asked, dismounting quickly. Anna shook her head. "All quiet, though Mr. Hayes thought he spotted a rider watching the station from the ridge about an hour ago. When he investigated, whoever it was had gone." Catherine exchanged glances with Wade. "They're watching our movements, confirming their plan is working." The replacement stage arrived shortly after, with 2 armed guards riding shotgun, a precaution Wade had ordered before they'd departed town. As the passengers were helped aboard, Catherine made a swift decision. "Anna, go with them," she instructed. "Once in town, gather whatever you value from the ranch and take it to Martha's. Stay there until I return." For once, Anna didn't argue, recognizing the gravity in her mother's tone. "Be careful, Ma," she said simply, embracing Catherine briefly. Before climbing aboard the stage, with the stage safely on its way, Catherine and Wade rode for town via a different route, taking a challenging shortcut through Diamondback Ridge that would put them ahead of anyone planning to intercept the stagecoach or launch an attack on the town. As they crested the final rise overlooking Rattlesnake Gulch, Catherine reined her horse to a halt. Wade did likewise, following her gaze to where thin columns of smoke rose from the direction of her ranch. "They're burning you out," he said quietly. Catherine's expression hardened, her hand drifting to the Colt at her hip. "They're trying to, but they've underestimated what they're facing." "A widow with a ranch?" Wade suggested. Catherine shook her head, the transformation from Catherine Sullivan to quick-draw Catherine, completing itself in the set of her shoulders, the coolness of her gaze, the practiced ease with which she checked her weapons. "No," she replied, "a woman who's stopped running from her own legend." As they rode toward the rising smoke, Catherine felt a strange sense of clarity. For 6 years, she'd tried to bury her past, to be only half of who she truly was. Now, with that past exposed and her 2 identities finally merging, she faced the future with a completeness she hadn't known since Thomas's death. Whatever waited at her burning ranch, whether Blackwell himself or Mason's hired guns, they would find neither the vulnerable widow they expected, nor the lone gunslinger of legend, but something new and perhaps more formidable. A woman fully reconciled to all aspects of herself, with a community at her back and a daughter no longer, sheltered from truth but strengthened by it. The legend of Quickdraw. Catherine hadn't ended when she'd changed her name and settled in Rattlesnake Gulch. It had simply been waiting, evolving, preparing for this moment when past and present would finally converge into a future where Catherine Sullivan and Quickdraw Catherine were no longer separate identities, but 2 essential halves of one remarkable whole. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.